After 3, this meeting of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board is called to order. And so we'll go through who's here. To my left is Danny Tenenbaum, myself, Gene Schmitz, chair. Right now, Corey Simonson is expected, but not here, may be late. Peter has sent a message, he will not be here. To my right is Whitney, Whitney Meek, and then Fred Allendorf, and then finally down at the end, the always gregarious Britt Aronson. Yeah, I saw you doing you were playing somewhere, and I try to remember where I saw you playing. You weren't at first night, were you? You were, okay, that must have been where it was. Okay, so going to approval, I think everybody has them in front of them. If you want to take a minute or two and go through them. The minutes from December 4th. And I had one question, and I don't know if it can be answered or not. On the second page under 6.2.2, and that said, board discussed bicycle pedestrian counts. I don't recall, and I did not look at the 2-hour audio tape. If the idea of modifying some of the surveys we do during the bike ped counts could be done, so I'll let that go until maybe Ben can fill me, or if anybody else remembers. I had meant to bring up something to the effect, and I think I may have discussed it with one or two people, the idea that we're trying to get information on, did everybody find the spot on the agenda? Okay. Bicycle pedestrian counts. Usually we have, how many people here have participated in the counts? Anybody else? Just me, okay. So they do the counts at about 30 different spots around the city. And it's just a tally sheet for bikes and pedestrians, and that's basically it. At some of the locations, they have people who are asking people who are riding or walking by if they wouldn't mind doing a survey, and then there's a series of questions. I'm not familiar with the questions, but it seems like the survey usually takes about 3 to 5 minutes. And so my idea was, if we want to gather some information about not only how many people are riding their bikes at these different intersections. Ben, you just got back. I'm looking at under the minutes on the second page towards the top, it said board discussed bike pedestrian counts. I'm trying to remember if I brought up the idea of having what I might call like an instant survey, asking people as they're coming by to just give us their impression, their estimate of how many hours or how many miles a week that they spend commuting, so we can get more of a picture of
I remember that you brought up that idea, yes.
Pardon?
You did bring up that idea.
I did, okay, that just wasn't included in print. Okay, so that's covered. Okay, so we got that cleared up. Anything else, questions? Okay, so with nothing, we're going to, as that little comment, going to approve the previous minutes. Current agenda, it's right here.
Can we switch new business and old business, or really move new business up
yeah, I have,
to item 6?
Yeah, I think certainly item 8.2. I don't have any trouble with. I don't know how long the review of the pedestrian facilities is going to take. I think we should get to the bylaws. Should be a priority.
We definitely will, but it's just I want to respect the other staff people's time who came here to present. Absolutely.
So that's Catherine, and who else?
Aaron.
And Aaron's going to be the pedestrian facilities?
Yep.
Okay. Nope. Anybody have a problem? Yeah, that's fine. We'll switch new and old up. So we're going to wait for...
I also just want to make a quick comment about the agenda. This agenda format is kind of locked in because of our the software that we use that produces it, but that is changing. This is the last month that we are using that software, and so we have the chance to make it look a little bit different for next month, because I realize every time we have a presentation come, I'm making a request to switch and move it above, and so we're going to just be able to handle that internally in the future.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at 8.1. So Aaron, thank you. Just point of order. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Bob. Yeah, so we modified the current agenda, and now we're going to go to public comments. Sorry. And Bob, thank you. Introduce yourself for everybody. Oh, let's get it. Ah, there it comes. I feel like I'm back in high school. That's better.
Good afternoon, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board. Thank you for the work you do to help make our city more livable and healthy. I'm Direct Missoula Institute for Sustainable Transportation, or MIST, and I'm going to keep my comment to 3 minutes, and you can look at the handout I gave you more in detail later. And I do have an ask for this board to consider a proposal for one of your upcoming meetings. Missoula values safe and accessible streets, and that's one of the tenets of MIST and why we exist. Right now, we feel that Higgins through downtown, south of Broadway, and Broadway through our downtown, in essence, violate safety and accessibility and health. There's lots of people injured on these streets, car flow is blocked, and the bikeways stop and start. There's a very good technique going from 4 lanes to 3, 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane instead of 2 lanes in each direction. Big benefit is to drivers without having the inner car lane, when drivers take a left, block that through lane, and there's a graphic there on the bottom of the first page that shows that illustration. Missoula has completed 2 successful 4 to 3 lane conversions, West Broadway, which ended a string of pedestrian fatalities, and North Higgins. It's a much more inviting streetscape in our opinion. We have an opportunity to change these streets. Usually change is precipitated by planning and discussion. Downtown master plan kickoff workshops are next week. So here's a great opportunity to improve the health, safety, viability, walkability, bikeability, and drivability right in our downtown. The Riverfront Neighborhood Council borders the hip strip, and they voted 34-0 in support of a 3-lane Higgins. A few years ago, the City Public Works Director expressed public works support for a 3-lane Broadway from Orange to Madison and a 3-lane Higgins from South 5th Street up to Railroad Street. That was before the North Higgins project. We already have a 4 to 3 lane conversion on North Higgins now. This type of conversion or type of street is supported hugely by our complete streets policy, long-range transportation plan, and also our growth, our Missoula growth policy. There's too many objectives to list in the Our Missoula growth policy that really support a healthier walking and biking environment. If you look on the back of that handout, that first graphic is from the original downtown master plan in 2009, showing the option for a 3-lane Higgins. People do get doored on Higgins between Broadway and the bridge. It's a very skinny bike lane right up against car doors. It's the only time I've been hit on my bike in Missoula was being doored right there at Liquid Planet several years ago. MDT, as you all are probably aware, is doing a bridge deck redo, and I looked through their study and they have a quote saying a 2-lane bridge, because you don't need a center turn lane on a bridge. A 2-lane bridge would be an option. The city would need to pursue this in conjunction with MDT and FHWA. Federal Highways has a strong statement about converting to 3 lanes anytime you have an urban environment, and especially if it's under 20,000 cars a day, which all these segments of roads are well under 20,000 cars a day, and they have been for decades. It does not seem to be rising. One area between Brooks and 5th that does reach just above 20,000 cars a day, so that'll take some extra design work. And I'm confident in the public workshops and with our city staff and everyone involved that we'll be able to figure out challenges. The last graphic shows a protected intersection. That's one challenge with the North Higgins cycle tracks, is the way that the cycle tracks bend towards traffic. Right hooks can be an issue, low visibility can be an issue, but there's this design of protected intersections which tend to help with the health and mobility of all modes. I will end my comment there and suggest that you all perhaps take up this type of issue at a future meeting before the downtown master plan is finalized, which I think is scheduled for this summer. And I'd really encourage you all to be involved, whether as a board or individuals, at the design workshops next week. Lastly, this is a work in progress, and if you have information or suggestions on to make this handout better, I would gladly listen to that. My email is on the first page. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Britt, comments?
Can I make a motion that we include this on our agenda for next month?
Sure. Second? Anyone? I'll second. Okay, Danny, second motion. In favor? By hands? Okay, passes. Okay, so we're going to add the discussion of the concept that Bob put forth for next month. Does anybody have any questions in terms of the diagrams, et cetera?
I guess I just want to clarify that I mean that it would appear on the agenda in such a way that we could take action on it if we chose. So.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just one quick thing, Bob, on the last diagram here.
The protected intersection?
Yeah, so that is basically keeping the current bike lane, cycle track, whichever, I forget the right termination, where the bikes are going between parked cars on the roadway and the sidewalk. Yes?
Yes.
So what this is doing is just keeping that, where the bikes keep going straight, and essentially they're using they're sharing the crosswalk to cross the intersection? Is that what that's showing?
Yeah, the crosswalk is separate from where the bikes cross. I know this diagram's not the easiest to see.
So I see the ladders. That's for pedestrians, or that's for the bikes?
The right side is for the pedestrians. Closer to the middle of the road is for the bikes.
Okay, so the bikes are, as normal, closer to the traffic lane, and then, so the pedestrians actually have to move a little farther over to their right to cross at these intersections.
It does look like a little bit to the right,
yeah,
and then the
okay.
people on bikes a little bit to the right. And then there's those corner sort of bulb outs that keep drivers from cutting the corners too fast.
Yeah, it keeps the speed down on the
so
right turn on red.
And the visibility tends to greatly improve as the driver makes a little bit harder of a right turn.
Yeah, no, yeah, okay, yeah, no, these are good. Okay, now the diagram is clear to me. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
it. So, looking at item 8.1, pedestrian facilities master plan. Thank you, Aaron.
All right, well, thank you for having me here today to present this. I'm Aaron Wilson, the city's Transportation Planning Division Manager. And we have a pedestrian facilities master plan, a draft document that we are taking out and getting public comment on. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity to present to the Bike Ped Advisory Board and get any last minute comments on this plan before we take it to our policy committee for adoption later this month. So while we do have a draft document, we're always willing to take and excited to take comments that will make it better before we submit that final draft for adoption. So I'm going to go through kind of the highlights of the plan, the work that we did, some of the main points and recommendations that came out of this process. It's been about a year and a half since we started, so we've been doing a fair amount of work over that time. So the first point to make is to look at the goals and what the pedestrian facilities master plan is intending to accomplish. In order to come up with these goals, we looked at a lot of our other plans, whether they be transportation or regional plans, such as the growth policies for the city and the county, our active transportation plan, and we tried to pull out some key themes and goals from all of those plans that would be supported through pedestrian facilities. I won't go through all of these goals in great detail, but just point out that we tried to be comprehensive in what we're attempting to achieve in terms of increasing safety for pedestrians, really supporting our mode shift goals that were in the most recent long-range transportation plan, and supporting some of the other goals such as health and equity and sustainability and economic growth, and using our investments in pedestrian infrastructure to achieve those goals. I want to talk a little bit more about our mode split goal and make sure we continue to focus on this as we continue about our transportation work, and pedestrian facilities are a big part of that. In the 2016 long-range transportation plan, we set an ambitious mode split goal for all modes that would essentially triple biking, walking, and quadruple transit ridership over the next 30 years. So we've highlighted here walking commutes, so that's people going to and from work and school, going from about 6% to 18%. It's a pretty significant increase. We also drew on some work by there's a group in Missoula that was funded through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation called Invest Health. That's a partnership between the city, the health department, and some other community partners to look at how the built environment affects public health and social equity. And so there was a lot of work that group did, particularly looking at pedestrian infrastructure and working with those neighborhoods that they identified as having persistent poverty and health disparities, and sidewalks were one of the top issues that those neighborhoods brought up. So we had a lot of work that group had already done that we could pull into this plan and help achieve some of the goals that around public health and social equity that we could achieve through the pedestrian infrastructure. We also have some guiding principles. So as we make decisions moving into the future about investing in pedestrian infrastructure or making improvements, how we make those decisions can really be affected by these guiding principles and the things that we need to consider when we're making those decisions. So as I mentioned, the process today, we started about a year and a half ago doing a review of our existing conditions. So we did an inventory of all of the sidewalks in the city, looked at other pedestrian facilities such as intersection improvements, shared use paths, ADA improvements like curb ramps and where those are located and where they're not. Then we went through a process of trying to determine what our priorities are for investing in pedestrian infrastructure. So how do we take our limited funding and get greater benefit from that in terms of achieving our other community goals. And then we did some work on implementation strategies. So how can we be more efficient in our work in creating pedestrian infrastructure? And then finally, over the last several months, we've been developing the plan, getting some feedback, and refining it and coming up with the draft that you have today. So kind of a quick overview of what this plan is looking at. It's not just sidewalks. So when we talk about pedestrian facilities, I'm sure all of you would be familiar with these, but we're looking at sidewalks, shared use paths, trails, sort of our backbone of our non-motorized connections. And then other things such as shared spaces or WUNRFs. That could be protected shoulders or roadways where you don't have a separation of pedestrians or traffic, and ways that you can design those to be more accommodating and provide good pedestrian facilities without necessarily building a separated sidewalk or shared use path. We looked at sidewalk condition throughout the city. So we had volunteers out assessing generally. This is really planning level analysis. So we were looking at averages over a block face. So it's not very refined data as far as specific locations, but it gave us a sense of what the overall condition of our sidewalk system that we currently have is, and what the implications are for ongoing maintenance and what the need is for repairing or replacing existing sidewalks. And we looked at missing sidewalks by neighborhood. So where do we have the greatest need? And looking at what kind of facility types would we want in those neighborhoods. So good example is Upper Rattlesnake has the most potential miles. If you're just looking at street miles without curb, gutter, and sidewalk, there's the greatest percentage missing in the Rattlesnake. However, a lot of those streets, if you're thinking about just creating accommodating pedestrian environments, you could do something potentially other than curb, gutter, and sidewalk to make those safe and accessible. So it's something that we've considered in this plan, is thinking in terms of the context and how we can be efficient and cost effective with our investments. We also looked at safety, so looking at where we have reported crashes involving pedestrians, and looking at that in comparison to where we have facilities, what type of facilities are there. And then looking at trends. So overall, our trends look pretty good. Our crashes involving pedestrians are decreasing. However, pedestrian fatalities, there's not very many, thankfully, so it's hard to get a really solid trend out of that when you only have 1 to 2 or 3 a year. But that's not necessarily decreasing. So something that we will continue to be evaluating and trying to find ways to prevent even those 1 or 2 or 3 pedestrian fatalities, essentially taking the Vision Zero approach to pedestrian crashes. Looking at our existing demand and mode split, so Missoula does pretty well in terms of the number of people commuting to work or school. It's our one sort of really consistent measure of pedestrian activity. We also do bike and ped counts every year, but those are in specific locations. It's hard to get an absolute count. So using ACS, the census data that comes out every year, we can use that estimate to sort of track how often people are walking and how much they're walking to school and work, which is our busiest time in terms of traffic. So right now we're about 6%. That's ahead of the state, Montana as a whole, which is about 4.5 or 5%. And the United States as a nation hovers right just a little below 3%. So we're doing much better than the state or the country as a whole, but if you look at the trend that we're on out to 2045, where we have that mode split goal of 18%, we're certainly not on the right trend to achieve that goal. So there's a considerable amount of work that needs to be done to get us there in that time period. I think it's also worth talking a little bit about sidewalk costs as we go through this plan. It's getting increasingly more expensive, as a lot of things are in the construction world, to build sidewalk. On average, we're at about $800,000 a year in investment. The cost per mile is actually more like 700 or 800. This is a little bit of an older chart. In the most recent year, this year, it's about $700,000 per mile of sidewalk to construct that. So looking at, we have about 230 miles of missing sidewalk. Even if you assume we're only going to construct half of that we can find other solutions for those other 100 miles, you're still looking at potentially 100 years of investment just to build out the missing sidewalk network. So there's a ton of need out there, and it's getting more expensive. And so we really need to think about being more efficient in how we invest that money and getting the most benefit out of how much sidewalk that we can build. So that leads us to the one major piece of this plan is a method to prioritize where those investments occur. So if we're only building 1 mile to 2 miles of sidewalk a year, where can we get the most benefit out of that investment? So we went through a process. We did some public meetings and outreach, talked to our stakeholders to come up with what are the most important aspects in terms of our community goals and how can we build sidewalk infrastructure to help achieve those. So there were 2 main components to that. One was sort of the social health and equity. We're calling the demographic elements. So that's neighborhoods that have higher percentages of low to moderate income households, higher rates of adult obesity, zero car households, persons with a disability, and aging adults. The other major component that we looked at are sort of the physical built environment features. So what's the proximity to schools or transit stops, grocery stores, parks, some of those destinations that would be relevant to our mode split goals. So common locations that people would be walking to. After the public process, we landed on weighting the demographic pieces about 70% of our overall priority score and the physical built environment at about 30%, and that gave us our overall priority needs score. So we went through and mapped essentially every block in Missoula in relation to how close it was to transit and parks and those destinations, as well as their location within census tracts that have those higher rates of demographic statistics that we were trying to affect. So that leads us to this priority map. It's not saying that we would build all of those sidewalks immediately or necessarily telling us where the project would occur, but if we wanted to have the greatest effect on all of those factors, including the built environment and the social demographics, these are these darker colors are the places where we could have the most impact. So we also in the plan talk about selecting projects within those areas that help achieve. So if you're doing a project in a high priority area, looking at connections to schools and connection to parks and some of those, trying to achieve those goals through project selection. The other interesting piece that we realized as we went through this process is that when you look at the city's land use map, so on this kind of dark or olive green color is our higher density residential land use. So that's where we're anticipating a lot more residential development to go, which happened to coincide pretty well with our high priority sidewalk needs. So again, we'd be there's a need to build sidewalks in areas that are also identified for high density development in the future. So those two pieces ended up supporting each other reasonably well. So we also looked at areas, since this is an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization plan, we wanted to look not just at the city, but at areas outside of city limits, and they're a little bit different than looking at just sidewalk locations along every street. So we looked at some different neighborhoods and tried to assess what the characteristics of those are, what the future plans are for those areas, and come up with some recommendations that would make sense for those different neighborhoods. So for instance, Target Range Orchard Homes, it's a more rural and suburban feel to it and not necessarily as connected of a road network. So having curb gutter sidewalk on every street might not make sense, both financially and from a characteristics of that neighborhood. So we recommend looking at other options such as shared use paths, which already exist out there, but making better connections with those. Looking at some other rural designs, there's some pretty innovative design solutions that include protected shoulders or some improvements that would be significantly less cost and wouldn't impact the character of that neighborhood as much. Some other neighborhoods like East Missoula, Bonner, Milltown have a more urban form currently, and so we would recommend as those areas develop or have a need for infrastructure that curb gutter sidewalk might be an appropriate improvement there. But we should focus on the highways and arterials first, and then look at the need in the local streets. And then areas along Mullen, west of Reserve, that we anticipate will be new development at a higher density, that those be developed with complete streets and include sidewalk and appropriate pedestrian facilities as those developments occur in the future. So we did an intersection analysis knowing that it's not just the presence of sidewalks or shared use paths that affect how accessible our streets are to pedestrians. It's also how easy is it to get across our collectors and arterials. And so we looked at essentially every intersection in the plan area, and using this is FHWA guidance in terms of what the risk is to a pedestrian. So looking at speed limits, volumes, and the number of lanes. And then there's a number of recommended design solutions based on those characteristics. So we essentially evaluated the speed, the volume, and the number of lanes for every intersection, and then looked at what the existing improvements were, and came up with essentially a risk score. So if you imagine an intersection that had 45 miles per hour, 15,000 plus cars a day and 5+ lanes, that's sort of your highest risk intersection for a pedestrian, and then look at, is there a traffic signal there or a roundabout, or what level of protection or improvement for pedestrians is there, just to give us a general sense of where do we have issues in our network where there are large gaps where we have very little pedestrian connectivity across those roadways. So again, from that, we came up with a map that kind of generally shows where those issues are, and it's not necessarily surprising, but I think reinforces this idea that we have a lot of work to do to improve connectivity. So you can see Reserve Street, there are very few signalized or protected places to cross Reserve, and it's high speed, high volumes, and lots of lanes. You see a similar relationship on Brook Street. So it sort of highlights places where we have significant barriers for pedestrian connectivity, and that helps us identify locations where, as we're doing projects or coming up with funding, we can reduce those barriers and do pedestrian improvements. And so one of the final components of the plan is an ADA transition plan. So this is looking specifically at, there are federal requirements that we have an ADA transition plan, but we wanted to go a little bit above and beyond just the bare minimum requirements of having this plan and identifying a schedule by looking at what are the specific issues related to different kinds of disabilities. So people in a wheelchair might experience different challenges than someone who has a vision disability or some other challenges. So we again looked at around the city. We did an inventory of where we have curb ramps, where we do not have curb ramps, tried to identify what some of those barriers are and make recommendations. So again, looking at neighborhoods where we have existing curb ramps. There are very few that are even above 50% of intersections complete with reasonably modern ADA improvements, such as truncated domes and curb ramps that meet current requirements. So there's a lot of work to do here, much like there is with building out the sidewalk infrastructure. And again, we can map those then and look for places where we can make connections or make improvements that both benefit our existing infrastructure and improve connectivity for people with disabilities. And then one of the requirements is to have a schedule for how we would propose improving those intersections and bringing our facilities up to current standards for the ADA requirements. And those are obviously, there's a cost associated with that. So trying to understand, if we're on a 30-year implementation for installing missing ADA facilities for all sidewalks in our highest priority category, so on that priority map for sidewalks, if we were just to improve ADA facilities in those areas over 30 years, it's close to $100,000 per year to make that happen. So again, there's a huge cost associated with these, and there's a lot of need. So being strategic and efficient in how we make those improvements will be really critical. And then again, just coming up with some recommendations on how we can improve facilities for people with different kinds of disabilities, and really thinking through what those challenges are and making sure that the people designing our facilities understand those, and we're staying current with what best practices are, not just what the minimum requirements would be for a facility. And then finally, implementation. Again, looking at, there's a lot of missing sidewalk out there in the city, so we need to be a little bit more efficient in how we're investing our funds and building out pedestrian infrastructure. And there's a lot of challenges. So there's a lack of staff and resources, both at the city and the county and the state. There's street and pavement conditions. So even if you improve the ramps, say at an intersection, because of our road condition, it may not meet, getting across that road may not meet ADA standards. So the slope of the road going across it may be too steep. And just trying to put in curb and gutter on a street that's falling apart doesn't make a whole lot of sense or make it that much accessible for people. And then there are some costs. So there's an assessment process in the city associated with sidewalk installation that poses potentially a significant burden on property owners. So thinking about how we fund sidewalks, and as we move into potentially the neighborhoods that have higher rates of social and health inequities, how are we funding sidewalks and what impact does that have on those neighborhoods? And then there are a whole host of things like right-of-way and space constraints, contractor capacity at the city or regional level for building these projects, and then how do we achieve other standards like boulevards, street trees, things that we know are really critical for good pedestrian infrastructure. So a lot of challenges, needless to say. In order to start addressing some of those, we came up with a set of action steps and implementation strategies that we can start working on to address those challenges and create pedestrian infrastructure that is better and more efficient and maximize the use of our investments. So that's, I guess, the long and short overview of what's in the plan. Happy to take any questions or if you have comments or thoughts on the plan. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to at least skim through it and see what's in there.
Thanks, Aaron. Just to remind everybody, it's here. Ben did put this file out as on the meeting agenda. So if you go back and look to the email, you can see the whole. I think it's 90-some pages of this.
Yeah, it's about
to go over it, and anything you see that kind of rings a little like, raises your eyebrow or have a question. Obviously, you can get a hold of Aaron, and he can answer your questions or accept our comments. I did have one question, though, in terms of suitability of or priorities of the sidewalks, is that it seems like the sidewalk condition and when you get to an intersection, whether there's an ADA compliant ramp are considered as two separate issues. And I'm wondering, are you kind of possibly rolling those two together in terms of saying for going from point to point, especially if you're looking at pedestrian routes to certain facilities like schools and parks and whatever, that you can sort of saying, okay, this point here from A to B is pretty good for sidewalks, but not good for ramps. So putting those two scores together, we need to put this on the priority list?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to make the decision on what the most important priority is. So we tried to focus on what the needs are and places that we would think it's important to prioritize. But there are those three key components that are the condition of the existing sidewalks, the presence of ADA improvements like curb ramps, and then locations where we have no sidewalk. And so they all have slightly different, when you look at the city or the region as a whole, they're all a little bit different. The places where you don't have sidewalks, you don't have an issue with sidewalk condition because they don't exist. But that doesn't mean there isn't a need to build those sidewalks. But if you're just focused on building new sidewalks, all of our existing infrastructure is going to continue to deteriorate, or you have sidewalks where you almost have good connectivity, but you just need a few curb ramps. So I think there's a lot of, refinement that needs to be done when we're actually picking the projects to do in terms of weighing those different factors. Do we want to just build new sidewalks where we don't have them, or do we want to try to continue to maintain or improve existing facilities? And we don't necessarily have a really good answer, but what we try to do in this plan is address here's where we would do those improvements to have the greatest benefit on those different goals for the community. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a really hard one to answer, I think.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along the line of using a specific, let's just say a generic 4-block section between, I don't know, some housing areas like senior housing in a park or whatever, saying, okay, we've got these 4 blocks or 6 blocks to say, well, we want to improve the sidewalks or put sidewalks in. Wouldn't make too much sense to do that without also addressing the ramp situation at the same time. You don't want to have a chain that's got a bunch of good links and then one bad link, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's the way the city typically develops projects. Is they identify places, whether it's a new sidewalk project or rehabilitation repair project. Typically, there's a combination of replacing, deteriorating, adding ADA. Anytime you're doing work that affects the sidewalk, you're having to upgrade the ADA facilities. I mean, that's just a requirement. So usually those projects are a combination. It really just depends on where the project is and what the conditions are. So, yeah.
I had a couple questions. First of all, what were the goals for mode share increasing up to 18%? What were those based on? Because that's a pretty huge jump. So I'm just kind of curious where that came from.
Yeah, so in our last long-range plan update, we did a bunch of research on what other communities were doing, what their current mode split was, if they had set goals, what those goals were, and try to establish some ranges or potential options for what our mode split goals could be. It was sort of our first shot at setting a mode split goal in Missoula. And so we came up with several options, one being kind of the business as usual, just continue on our current trend, and we'll see some increase, but maybe not a significant amount. And then we had kind of a moderate increase of doubling our biking and walking and bus, and then set this ambitious, which the ambitious was essentially the high end of what other communities were looking at. Again, being that ambitious. And when we brought that out to the community and to our policy committees and other folks, they were very interested in setting that ambitious mode split goal. So there's no real science behind it. I mean, it's a goal. So, but generally speaking, if we meet all those goals, our single occupancy vehicle rate will be cut in half, and which is a pretty significant decrease in the number or the percentage of people who are commuting. But if you look out 30 years with population growth, all of that, you're still, it essentially allows us to maintain all of our current not have to expand any of our roadways to accommodate that additional growth. So it makes us much more efficient in how we use that transportation infrastructure. Was essentially how we approached that.
Okay, great. And then on the topic of sidewalks, I know that when that Invest Health project happened, there was some pushback from people in the Rattlesnake who didn't want the sidewalks. So you had mentioned other creative options for, replacing sidewalks or creating some shared use pathways. So I was just kind of curious maybe what some of those options would be.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work out there looking at, if you have really, sort of, I guess the Woonerf concept, which is a shared space. So if you design your roadway right to have very slow traffic and prioritize, make it very clear that this is primarily a pedestrian space, but vehicles are allowed there, that those end up being very safe and comfortable facilities. So you can share the space. It requires some specific design elements to make sure that that happens, so cars can't just drive through at high speeds. So that's one option. There are doing things like protected shoulders or designating a space on the existing road that is specifically for pedestrians or even cyclists that has some separation, but maybe it's not as much as a curb, gutter, boulevard, sidewalk. And we have some of those in Missoula. So out in Target Range, Orchard Homes, I believe it's on Spurgeon Road, there's essentially just a stripe down the shoulder and then a pedestrian symbol. So it's one side of the road, but it's at the end of the road. It's a cul-de-sac. There's very few houses there, so the traffic volumes are very low. And so you're just creating that signed space that is for pedestrians. And so it's certainly very cheap to do and provide some separation. Does that get at your question? So there's a whole,
Yes.
There's a rural design guide that's dedicated specifically to how do you provide pedestrian facilities in a place that's maybe not as urban as a city block.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Aaron, I was just wondering, was there a prior pedestrian facilities master plan?
Sort of. There was the city had a draft sidewalk master plan that had been done in the 90s and occasionally updated. And so that's kind of where we started, is looking at how that plan was set up. And I'm not actually sure if it was ever officially adopted or not, but it was certainly used by the city to prioritize sidewalk projects. And it took the approach of focusing on the core, so the downtown core first, and then essentially expanding out from there, and really just looking at some of those physical generators like the university or commercial corridors, and prioritizing the collector and arterial network first, and then moving into the residential neighborhoods. And we took a little bit different approach by looking at some of these other, citywide, where do we have some of this health and equity need? So using sidewalk infrastructure investments to help impact those issues and provide facilities where people maybe have the greatest need, in addition to looking at where those destinations are, like transit stops and schools and higher density commercial districts. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. And again, just the whole thing is on a file that's been attached to the email he sent out to us. So, and for those people, I think Ben maybe send out another email and suggest people go to look at this and let Aaron know directly if they have any comments, concerns, additions, et cetera, for that. Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. Oh, sorry.
I have a few things. I really liked it that you had a discussion in the back, the exploration of reducing costs. I just wanted to see if you would share that with everybody now.
Oh,
The chart at the back of page 45.
yeah, let me see if I
Because that's something I mentioned before, that if we don't have enough money to build 100 years worth of sidewalks, maybe we could find a way to build them with less money. And so,
yeah, like the alternative materials.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of perhaps an appendix or whatever, but I
Yeah.
was wondering where's the implementation considering that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We did look at alternative materials or construction methods, things like that. And what we found is most of them are either not tested well enough to know if they actually save you money in the long run, or they're more expensive than concrete and we still don't know, or, Missoula is we have a lot of freeze thaw cycles, things that could impact some of those alternative materials, or there's not a lot of good evidence that they work or actually reduce the cost of providing facilities. But let me get to where you were.
As you're looking for that, Aaron, there is one down at the very end of the list, and they did the MUD did a little pilot project up at a place where they have, I think they use tumbled crushed glass.
Oh yeah, Missoula Urban
chips.
Demonstration Project.
Yeah.
It's a crushed glass aggregate.
Yeah, and it could be like the kind of thing, instead of, obviously it gives you drainage and all that kind of good stuff, but again, you have to see how long it holds up under.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how well it holds up. There's also a lot of maintenance that's required for some of the, you can't just let that glass sit there over time. You have to, they clog up over time, or, the glass slowly deteriorates and breaks down, and so you have to kind of refresh that periodically.
Yeah.
And so it might be a challenge to have that. Sort of what we found with the alternative materials is that they're just really, there's no magic bullet out there that we're going to be able to save a bunch of money and continue to build. I mean, the one nice thing about we have sidewalks in the city that are upwards of 100 years old or more, and they're still perfectly functional. I mean, they sometimes require some rehab, but it's a very long-lasting investment, so it's expensive, but if you're getting 100 years out of your infrastructure investment, that's pretty good. And there's currently no alternative materials that seem to offer that benefit, but it's on our radar. We will continue to look at those options. We also looked at some other ways that communities fund sidewalks. There's conversations at the city right now ongoing. I don't know if all of you noticed in the news back in December, there's a lot of concern about the cost of sidewalks and how the city is currently funding those projects in terms of property owner assessments. And so I think there will be some creative work that comes out of that in terms of how the city funds sidewalk installation. So, yeah.
I also thought it was really great that there was a mention, in the document I got, it was 46. I thought my 45 was the alternative, so I don't know if I had exactly that document, but about how the people that were interviewed said that they wanted more shade trees on the sidewalks, and it just speaks to that chicken or the egg reality of more people will be doing it if there's better facilities. So at some point, you have to improve the facilities. And that the tree cover in town was far lower than the goal that you guys had set. I also wanted to point out on page 21, there's a scale, a graph of the different neighborhoods and the percentage of sidewalks that are okay or not. I was wondering if you could pull that up. The scale is, the axis on the x-axis is chopped off, so it doesn't show, it's on a percentage scale, but it doesn't show the full percentage. So it distorts the relative differences between the neighborhoods. And it also gives no indication of the absolute value of those numbers. So I'd like to see that data presented both ways.
Sure.
Because, if one neighborhood has only 10 miles of sidewalk, but this percentage is really off, I think it would help compare across neighborhoods better.
Yeah.
If all the charts if they're going to be percentage charts, they should go up to 100.
Yeah.
And then display both the relative and the absolute values, I believe. And also, I felt the same way about the ADA curb situation, because some neighborhoods have a lot more need for those than others.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that was just kind of a statistics thing. And one more thing I wanted to say was about the mode share goal. I liked the choice of the demographic factors, using the pedestrian system as a way to increase social justice and quality of life for people. And I thought that it's a little late now, but next time we do this, I think people that are not old enough to drive should be included in the same as people that are too old to drive. And as far as an ambitious mode share goal, people walking to school is one of the largest pools of people that you can push, and those are the ones that are on the road at the hour when you're most crowded anyway.
Yep.
So as far as bang for buck, I think the group of people 5 to 16 might be your 10,000, 20,000 mode share changes that you need.
Yeah, and it's
So-
something we definitely thought about, and schools were always high on the list of priority. And so I think as we do select projects, and we've tried to make that clear in the plan, that connections to schools and parks and transit are really critical. So even within these high priority areas, making those connections will be a huge part of selecting the projects that we choose. So making those first and then building out from there. Yeah, no, it's a good point.
And of course, I can't help but notice that childhood obesity is not mentioned alongside adult obesity, so there's future adult obese people.
Yeah, no, and some of this gets into just the amount of data that you're using. When you're trying to prioritize, sometimes if you use too much data, it sort of just dilutes the pool, and so it makes it really hard to come up with a priority area because you have too much data. And so where you have a high priority for, say, aging adults, you would have other areas that have a high priority for young, and so those two kind of just balance each other out, and then it's hard to, but it's a point well taken, and something that we've thought a lot about, of making sure that we're promoting activity and younger people walking to school or work or whatever it is. Yeah.
It's nice to see those goals explicitly stated in a document that will become part of city policy.
Yeah, no, exactly. Thanks.
Aaron, if the budget for Public Works remains as it is, do you think the city will be able to make a significant dent into what's proposed in the plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll continue to make effort. We'll continue to chip away at improving this infrastructure, but it's one of the challenges we have in transportation is there's way more need than there is funding. And I think that's not just in Missoula, that's nationwide, that our funding isn't keeping up with, it isn't even really allowing us to maintain what we have. I mean, we're barely able to keep up. So it's always a challenge to identify new facilities and build those. But we are building, we are doing sidewalk projects pretty much every year. We're trying to be creative in where we get that funding from, and working with Public Works. So when we're doing sewer or water projects, can we come in and do a sidewalk project or, street repair or something else that gets some efficiency out of those projects? So I think we'll become more efficient as we do have better plans and priorities. And this is a good way to justify trying to find that additional funding. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I think we'll continue. Having good plans is sort of the start to making progress and chipping away at those issues. Yeah. Any other questions? And we're happy if you email myself, or if you go to our website at MissoulaMPO.com, you can always read through. If you have other comments, feel free to send them to us via email, or you can call me or get in touch with us other ways. Happy to take those comments. And with that, if there aren't any other questions, thanks for having me, and yeah.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. And I believe next up is going to be Catherine on the Missoula in Motion strategic plan. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Catherine Auger with Missoula in Motion. I'm here to talk about the strategic plan that we just finished. So I think most of you are probably familiar with Missoula in Motion and what we do. We were founded in 1997. We are funded primarily through federal congestion mitigation air quality funds. And so one thing to note is that with this strategic plan, we looked at both Missoula in Motion's programming, but then also the programs within the Bicycle Pedestrian program that are also funded through CMAQ. Those programs overlap quite a bit, so it made sense to look at them all together. So why do a strategic plan right at this time? So as you can see, our previous one was done in 2012. So we were overdue for a new strategic plan anyways. We want to maintain relevancy in a field that's always changing, keep up with best practices. There's a lot of new technology out there, so ensuring that we're really fully utilizing that. And then we also see Missoula is growing really rapidly and want to ensure that our programs are having the most impact that they can as we grow really quickly with a lot of new people moving here. We also considered that mode split goal that Aaron brought up as well. So reducing those drive alone rates in half, and then it also quadruples the rate of people riding the bus to work and bike, and triples the rates of people commuting by foot and by bike. So we see Missoula in Motion as a really important component of achieving that mode split goal. So again, just ensuring that our programs are having the most impact that they can. So I mentioned the transportation options is a field that's always changing. The most significant shift in the field recently has been informed by social sciences and what we know about what makes someone change their behavior. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage individuals to change their behavior from taking all of their trips by driving alone in a car to at least taking some of their trips with a sustainable mode. So with that, the professionals in the field look at what's called the stages of change continuum. So that allows you to evaluate individuals based on their readiness to make a behavior change. You can then develop strategies that are tailored to each of those individual stages and provide one-on-one assistance to those individuals to help them move along those stages. So the most successful programs really focus on these stages of change, and they really emphasize spending a lot of time one-on-one with individuals rather than just kind of a mass marketing approach. So that's something that we're really trying to shift to. With that, we're reallocating our resources, so cutting back on funds spent with those kind of mass advertising campaigns, and instead increasing our staff capacity so that we can spend that focused one-on-one time with individuals. It also allows us to evaluate our programs differently, so rather than just looking at the number of people commuting sustainably and using sustainable modes, we can also measure how many people were moving from one stage of change to the next. So maybe they're not quite there yet, but we are making progress within their readiness to make a change. So our overall goals for the process was ultimately to just enhance transportation option services in Missoula, and then ensure that this high quality of service will sustain moving forward, whether or not there are changes in external factors or even whether or not there's changes in agency staff. So wanting to have clearly defined program elements. We also looked at our evaluation tools, so that's a really important piece. We are grant funded. We have to do a lot of reporting, so being able to identify the impact that we're having, and making sure that we're using all of the tools that are out there. And then we also evaluated staff roles and made some changes in that regard. We worked with local consultant, Community Forward Consulting, and we went through a pretty extensive process to develop our strategic plan. Ultimately, we came out with 5-year SMART goals with annual targets for each. We started the process by doing an extensive review of our current programming, and our consultant held 13 different interviews with a total of 18 stakeholders, both internal within our program and external in the community. So it was a pretty extensive process, and we were happy with what we came out with. And so as you can see, these are all of Missoula in Motion's programs that we do during a calendar year. So we do a lot, we have a lot going on throughout the year. Looking at these, we realized that we really don't have the capacity to add new programming, focusing on individualized marketing, while also maintaining all of these programs at the current capacity that we're doing them now. So we developed some criteria to, when looking at them, to prioritize which ones we will continue to sustain. So we looked at feasibility, so how feasible is it to do it, for us to do this project with our current funding and resources? The impact, so how effective is this program in actually normalizing sustainable transportation within the culture, shifting behavior, and reaching a target audience. We also looked at measurability, so that evaluation piece, if it is changing behavior, how well can we show that and prove that? And then capacity, so whether or not the program is staff intensive, resource intensive, or requires a lot of funding. So from there, we developed our 5 goals. And so the first is with our Way to Go Missoula program. And so this is what Way to Go Missoula refers to our individual outreach, and then also the platform that we use online that hopefully at least some of you have been on, that allows us to track people's sustainable commutes and then also offer incentives. So we'll continue that. We'll continue to work with local businesses to offer incentives to encourage that behavior change. And then we're also looking at developing new ways to make our kind of diehards, people who are using sustainable transportation very regularly, and create opportunities for them to become advocates and them to encourage others within the community. We also developed a target audience that we think could most benefit from this program, and that is people who are new to Missoula. So when people are in a time of transition, they don't have set habits. They're creating new habits anyways. So we thought that that was a very opportune time to reach them. So we will start to develop partnerships with some organizations in town and try and reach people who are new to Missoula. Our Way to Go for Workplaces program allows us to work with employers and help reach employees via the employer. That's a very effective way to create behavior change if you have that buy-in from the employer and you're normalizing sustainable transportation within that culture within a workplace. We heard from many of our partners that these programs are perhaps the most impactful that Missoula in Motion does. Our commuter challenge last year involved 97 different employers and has really strong community recognition. So we'll continue to grow that program and also continue to have a campus specific commuter challenge. So we'll do 2 challenges each year. We'll also continue to offer our mini grant program where we provide funding for workplaces to meet an identified need, some sort of infrastructure improvement that encourages sustainable transportation within the workplace. Our individualized marketing program refers to that one-on-one outreach. We've been wanting to do a program like this for quite some time, but we've just been really, we haven't had the ability to with our resources and staffing without making some significant shifts. So we're finally having that come to fruition this year. So we're developing a neighborhood individualized marketing program where we will have staff going door to door and working with residents and talking about transportation options, which is something that is seen to be pretty successful and done in many places throughout the country. So with this shift, again, it's more staff intensive. So one thing we were able to do to make this happen was increase our program assistant position from being half-time for Missoula in Motion to full-time. And again, we're still working within that existing budget, but we are just able to cut back on those advertising costs to make that happen. We will also be reallocating some of the bicycle ambassadors' time to initiating this program, which we plan to launch in the spring. So we're pretty excited about this new component. And so Missoula Motion has done a lot of events that are really well loved in the community. We think that events are impactful in creating a culture of sustainable transportation within the community, celebrating successes, highlighting new infrastructure, and then also shifting behavior change. But we looked at all of our events, and a lot of them are pretty time and resource intensive, so we decided to scale down some of those that are maybe more difficult to measure, or maybe just reward the people that are already choosing those behaviors, and maybe the ones that are not necessarily catalyzing that change in behavior. So we will kind of de-emphasize some of our programs such as Bike Month and Breakfast on the Bridges, but we are working with some other local organizations to possibly take those on. So we really want those to continue in the community. So we're hoping to partner so that it's just not within our capacity, but leveraging partnerships to make them continue to happen. And lastly, school outreach. So during the prioritization process, we realized that this is something that we really don't have the capacity to implement at this time. It's something that we haven't had we haven't really initiated very many programs working with the schools in the last few years, but we do want to include it in our plan so that if we ever have increased capacity and increase our resources, this is something that we think is important that we want to continue doing. We realize that we already work with a lot of families and a lot of schools, so we reach a lot of schools with our commuter challenge, both staff, a lot of the staff participate, and then through our commuter challenge we also have a lot of parents that participate at their workplaces. So we're hoping to kind of have that trickle-down effect working through our other programs, realizing that we'll reach a lot of families, and when we talk about commuting, we talk about, the entire family, all of their commute behaviors. Also with our neighborhood program, we will be reaching students and families as well. And then we also will realize that there are other partners working on encouraging active commuting among students. So Let's Move Missoula is doing quite a bit of that. So we'll continue to work through them and partner with them to support those initiatives. And then also the work that Free Cycles does to encourage and educate students about biking. So I mentioned we also looked at staffing roles and created some changes. So when looking at this plan and seeing what it would take to have it come to fruition, we realized we needed some sort of more clear leadership within Missoula in Motion. So we created the program coordinator position, which will offer more day-to-day management of staff, looking at work plans, managing that for each individual employee, training new staff, and identifying training needs for the staff as a whole. And then probably most importantly, evaluating and monitoring success of different program elements, and then also the programs as a whole and how those overlap and are helping us reach these overall goals. In addition to that, I mentioned we bumped up that program assistant position. It used to be split between Missoula in Motion and the MPO and the rest of the transportation division staff. And so we were able to bump that up to full-time. We just hired John, who's hiding in the corner over there with Sean. So we're excited to have additional capacity to really grow some of these programs. And with that creation, we also defined a more clearly outlined career ladder. So with clearly identified paths for advancement, we're hoping to increase retention and reduce our staff turnover for the long term. So that is a brief overview of the strategic plan, but does anyone have any questions?
I'll go. How many Sunday Streets programs were there? Was it 2 this past year?
For the last handful of years, we've just been doing one a year.
Just doing it one? Mm-hmm. Is there any plan to increase that?
So our plan, yes, our plan is to hopefully have the community increase that, but not necessarily Missoula in Motion. We're hoping to get some other partners on board. It is really important to have more than one a year to really catalyze behavior change. So we're hoping to work with different health promotion entities in Missoula and different groups to kind of join forces and have that program grow. It's a really expensive and a really time-intensive event to pull off as much as the community loves it and as much as we think it's really valuable in the community. So we'd love to do more than one a year, but we just don't really currently have that ability.
What's the primary expense for that that's sort of making it difficult?
The most expensive thing is the barricades for road closures. And then I think staff time would be the second, but yeah, they're really expensive. And we did in the 2 years ago, we shifted Sunday Streets from July to September so that it aligns with our other annual programs, Walk and Roll Week, and we created one less car day, which is that following Wednesday. So we feel like we've done a really good job of helping link Sunday Streets to sustainable transportation. At the event, we have people take the pledge to be one less car and let them know about the other programs related to sustainable transportation that we have coming up that following week. So it'll be in September again this year.
Okay. And is there any pushback from, I guess, the police or the city in terms of actually shutting down Higgins more often than once a year?
I think initially when we started the program, there was a lot of pushback, but because it's gotten such a strong response from the community, we haven't experienced that in recent years. My guess would be if we tried to increase it again, we would probably be able to. For a period of time, there were 2 Sunday Streets, and so I think because we've done that before, it would be possible to do it again, to have at least 2. I think if we tried to do it monthly, which would be awesome, we would definitely get more pushback. But we haven't had a whole lot recently.
Catherine, you had the one slide you had it look like a board game of all the dots of all the programs, and I was wondering how. And you mentioned evaluating them. So how did you go about evaluating them for effectiveness, and what do you define as effectiveness, and did you come up with that overall kind of prioritization to say, gee, if we lost so much of our budget, these are the ones that would have to go first kind of thing?
Yeah, so we kind of, so a lot of them are kind of interrelated. So within a program, we looked at all of the programs under that. So I guess to give an example for like Walk and Roll Missoula, we looked at that at the same time as One Less Car and also Sunday Streets. And so we kind of, looked at them as under the program element that they were a part of, and evaluated them within that. We have a number of different evaluation tools, so it was a little difficult to compare them apples to apples because we evaluate different things with different methods. So that's something that we're hoping to create to become more consistent. And there are some programs that have really tangible, like the Commuter Challenge has a really survey that we feel is really effective in showing that behavior change. But others, we feel like building a strong, normalizing sustainable transportation within the culture is a really important thing, but that's maybe harder to measure. So it was a little more fluid in how we looked at it, but with our prioritization, we don't have a set list of which one we would cut first, but within the program element, we look at it that way. I think Ben has some things to add, hopefully.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the ability to evaluate them played a role in how we strategically plan. So an example is Winter Clean Commute Day. That is it's a single day effort that does not require a ton of staff time or energy. It's a couple marketing pieces on Facebook and a press release, and then staffing a breakfast in the morning. And it's very easy to measure because we host that breakfast nearby an automatic counter on the trail system. And so we're able to look at the days leading up to it and then look at an increase in the number of people biking and walking to that breakfast on that day. And then contrast that with the Guaranteed Ride Home program, which we can measure the amount of people that utilize it, but there's really no way to get at how many people are choosing to ride the bus or walk or use the iRide van pool because they know they have that in their back pocket and they never have used it, but they're able to make choices to commute sustainably because that program is there. We really don't have a good way to measure that. And so, yeah, I guess just I wanted to echo what Catherine was saying, that they're definitely not comparing apples to apples in this, but part of the strategic planning process was figuring out, okay, what is measurable about these programs, and is that a useful measurement, and is that something that, let's set some goals then for those measurements and move forward with those.
Just looking at some of these, I mean, I can see from the way to go where people actually register, they log in their days that they commute. It's very easy to see we're having an effect because, this year compared to last year, et cetera, we have this many more people. Other things, and I'll use the Sunday streets as an example of something that's very popular. People like it, it's fun. It's expensive, as you mentioned. But I wonder, and this is just off the top of my head a little bit, is this sort of a reward, for lack of a better term, for the people who are already very committed to alternative transportation, as opposed to something that we're going to be doing to draw people into sustainable transportation modes that haven't been doing it before. So I just want to put that out there, as that the popularity of something isn't necessarily a measure of the effectiveness of it in terms of trying to get more people into a mode share.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I think we've really tried to make our messaging really clear with Sunday Streets. I think because it is so well known in the community and so well attended, we really reach a lot of people to talk about sustainable transportation. We have over 50 organizations that participate in the event, and we are able to kind of share our mission with them, and also kind of now have developed contacts at these organizations that we continue to work with throughout the year. And I think it's really valuable because it reaches such a diverse group of Missoulians and such a wide sect of the population, to have that many people stop and talk to us about taking the One Less Car Pledge, and maybe that's their first time being exposed to sustainable transportation. So I think, it's a great event for people who are already very well engaged, but it's also, I think, really effective in kind of reaching that audience that we would maybe never encounter with any of our other programs, and being able to connect with them and kind of getting our foot in the door to working with them in the future.
I'd also like to go back to the stages of change. One of the things that this planning process kind of opened my eyes to was that we're not expecting any one of these programs, with the exception of maybe the commuter challenge, for someone to go to driving every day to all of a sudden waking up the next morning and being a dedicated bus rider or bike rider. And so what the planning process allowed us to do was kind of figure out, okay, at an event like Sunday Streets, maybe that event's attractive because it gets the young family to think about making a change when it might really not be feasible in their life yet. And it also attracts that person who's a diehard, who realizes, whoa, there's a giant cultural push that supports my choices to bike and walk. I'm going to become an even more vocal advocate for these things. And so you're right, it does reward people who are committed, but it provides so much more inclusivity for those people to meet each other, and for new people to feel welcome.
I have an anecdote about Guaranteed Ride Home and States of Change, because I'm obviously an advocate and I love biking and walking, but I still use my car sometimes. And I went on a plane trip some time ago, and I decided to ride my bike to the airport, and the Guaranteed Ride Home was like an incentive for me to do that. I knew that if the weather was really bad when I came back in, and sure enough, I came back in at midnight and the snow was blowing everywhere, and I did not want to ride my bike home, and I ended up taking a cab, and I didn't submit my receipt because I thought, I can pay for this is fine. But just knowing that program existed actually even pushed me to change even farther. So I think that's really important, that you're not seeing it as all or nothing. And then, like you say, pushing somebody to where I'm doing this, I've got this for myself, but now I want everyone else to know that I do this and be proud of it and shout it from the rooftops.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great story.
I have a couple of things. Along that line, I know you guys do like an annual survey, don't you, as far as with your, at least with the work sites, it seems like. But that might be a good place to ask that question about the guaranteed ride home. You know, just would you or have you commuted knowing that that's in your back pocket? Because I thought about it this morning, actually, and I was going through my week and I thought, oh gosh, I can't probably commute tomorrow. And I thought, oh, I could, because if my schedule changes, I have that. So, like you, I haven't utilized it, but it is a security for me. And then I had one question. I'm just kind of curious which organizations you're working with to identify new folks into Missoula.
Well, we're open to suggestions if you have any ideas, but we're going to reach out to the Missoula Organization of Realtors, and possibly rental companies. Those were some ideas. Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're going to start.
Have you thought about like student housing or anything like that?
Yeah, we work closely with ASUM Transportation, so we'll kind of work via them to reach that student population. We also, when we work with different employers, we encourage them to have some information about transportation options, not just parking options, in their orientation for their new employees, and so that's often people who are new to Missoula. So we've developed some resources that we're going to share with our partners that they can include in their hire packet. So that would be another way.
Okay. And then I'm curious about your door-to-door program, what that's going to look like. Will that involve any training on the Way to Go app?
That will certainly be a component of it. Do you mean like training the people that we meet?
Right. If you find somebody who's kind of in that readiness to, to change, and they're like, yeah, I would do this, but I'm not really sure how to do it. Will you do like immediate training so that they can understand how to use that app?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. The goal is to have some really valuable resources for people so that when we're coming, they maybe have that extra incentive to talk to us. So we'll have like, if they would like bike lights, maps, and then also information about Way to Go and help them get set up with that if they're interested. And then we can do kind of on the spot route planning for them to go over their routes.
Great, thank you.
We're kind of right in the, I don't know, like early to mid stages of planning that program. We had, over Christmas break, we had a great phone call with like a national leader in those sorts of door-to-door campaigns. And so we are putting together our timeline. We just had a meeting yesterday, putting together our timeline, list of materials that we need, and starting to write the scripts about what the people would say when they go door to door. And okay, if they're home but don't have time, what do we leave them? And if they're not home but they emailed us that they're interested, what do we leave them? And so figuring out what are the different ways that an interaction could happen, and that's actually a question that we landed on. I think that yes, they would, because they would have an iPad anyway to be able to administer a survey, and so they'd be able to do the Way to Go club or the Way to Go tool training as well.
Just tying in with the diehards to advocate. So, and I'm just trying to envision what they would be doing. And one of the things that you mentioned was the idea of, instead of a broad scatter thing, is individualizing. So would there be a possibility, I was almost thinking of a Big Brother system, like Big Brother, Little Brother, bike buddy system, for you find somebody who says, yeah, I'd like to try to bike to work, but I'm not sure what streets to use, I'm not sure about dealing with traffic lights or car doors or anything, that you would say, oh, we've got a volunteer here who's been biking a lot, and they'll come over and hook up with you a certain weekend, and then you can try out different routes. Is that kind of how you envision this?
Yeah, that's what part of the door-to-door program is. And so we would limit it to a certain neighborhood, and so that we're not overwhelming our ambassadors, and that they'd be able to, we're thinking about a third of their time would go towards this program. But yes, those are the sorts of services that we would provide. And if, as we implement this, we find out that that's overwhelming, or or there's so many people that want it that we would need more help than just the ambassadors, we'll add you to the list of potential volunteers.
Well, as I say, that you want to be looking at trying to sort of advertise for these diehard, people who've been biking a lot, have a little free time, whatever, like myself, and say, oh, I'll hook up with so-and-so on certain weekends. You could almost even post that on the MIM website to say, if this is your situation, let us know. We'll try to, almost like carpooling, and sort of connecting with somebody who can work with you on an individual basis.
Yeah, and actually our Way to Go tool has the option to set up a bike pool, and it is for that particular thing where, someone might want to kind of be a resource for someone who's new to biking to work. So, we can certainly put something out about that, and if we have some interested parties, maybe holding off until the spring. I would think that maybe more timid bike riders aren't going to be out this time of year, but we'd love to use that bike pool option within Way to Go more as well.
If, for example, parklets or bike valet were to be eliminated from the MIM budget, do you think that would free up enough funding to do another Sunday Streets? I'm serious, because I loved Sunday Streets this year, and Higgins was packed, families, all generations, all these organizations out there. It was beautiful, and it's a real shame that it doesn't happen more often, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great feedback. We love hearing that, and the more we hear that, the more leverage we have to kind of make that case as we're trying to grow the program and get other partners to kind of take on part of it. The two programs you picked are pretty low cost. We've already kind of made parklets mostly. We don't allocate very many funds at all to that, so that wouldn't save us too much money. Bike valet is also not a very high cost program.
Yeah, the communities that are successful in hosting healthiest practice Sunday Streets, meaning at least 4 a year, have either a dedicated group that's all they do, that's all the company or nonprofit does, or it's run primarily by a health department, actually. Successful ones have the health component as a major piece.
Other things we've looked at is just getting a title sponsor, a really big sponsorship, and we would kind of have give them a lot of recognition with the program. We haven't had any success in having anyone take that on yet, but we think since it is such a gets so many people from Missoula to attend and has such strong community recognition that we're hoping that maybe we will be able to find an organization that wants to put their name on that and give us a chunk of money to do that. So that's another thing we've explored.
And when we say it's an expensive program, I mean, it is in our budget, but it's not compared to how other cities do it nationwide. We're doing it for a fraction of the cost other communities do. Most cities require police presence. Missoula does not, or at least has not so far. Comparing to Portland is the one that I'm most familiar with. Theirs is each event costs about $100,000 or more. Ours costs 10.
Are the barriers coming from Public Works or from a private entity?
Private entity, that's mandated in the street closure ordinance.
I see.
Looking at possible, citizen volunteers or whatever, people that are just interested, not your staff people, but people that are interested, maybe some of the people in bike shops, coming down to, during the summer, busier walking time, coming down to something like out to lunch in Karas Park and having promotional materials and information, sign-up pages and things like that. Has that been done or something you would consider?
The ambassadors are out to lunch quite a bit. There's also, we're careful not to step on toes of the MDA because there are organizations that pay for the privilege to distribute information at that event. And so we have a good relationship with MDA, and we do sponsor one of them where we're really gung-ho about giving out information there, but the ambassadors are more on the fringe at most of the out to lunches.
try. Okay, thank you, Catherine.
One thing I want to say is that in all of this, what gets a little bit lost is the ongoing educational work that we do together. Missoula Motion and I work hand in hand to distribute the bike maps, the bike lights, to register bikes and discuss bike safety when people come to register or pick up any of those resources. Run ads, create Facebook content related to safety, distribute the videos that we've made over the years. Occasionally we'll, especially like major national sporting event, summertime, well, like Summer Olympics and World Cup, we've had really good success running safety ads on TV. And so that is just kind of wrapped up into our general work. It's not a specific program aimed at mode shift the way that these all are.
Well, I would think anything that you do, to again make the bicycling seem more convenient and less threatening, then that's gonna help with mode share. Okay, any other comments or questions? I guess not. So thank you very much, Catherine. Appreciate it. And again, feel free to knock on her door or cubicle or wherever sometime. Suggestions. Okay, so we're back up to our switcheroo here. We've got the Sergeant Gregg is not here today, so we're going to move on to Ben with the bike ped program.
Yeah, that's a holdover. I mean, everything I'm going to update you on is in the old business, so we can just move to the bylaws.
Okay, great. I don't know how many people have the bylaws in front of them. You didn't bring a hard copy for people, did you?
I don't know. Sean, are there hard copies of any of that stuff? No?
Okay.
All right.
Well, I marked up, anybody else bring a copy from that was on Ben's email? Yeah. I did mark up my old one.
Why can't I find this, Sean? Oh, there it is, agenda.
There it is, yep. There it is. Ta-da. There you go.
All right, so, I thought I did it with track changes. I'm sorry. I bet this looked really the same to you. I made the document in Word with track changes when I saved it.
You didn't bring your highlighter.
When I saved it as a PDF, it did not include the track changes, apparently. Okay, so there's really only a few things that change in here so far. These were based on conversations we've had at previous board meetings, but let's see. The one is that the board chair shall help development services staff prepare and distribute any and all board meeting agendas. That was solely the responsibility of the chair previously, and we think that requirement in particular scared people from self-nominating for the chair because it seems like an unreasonable expectation that a volunteer member of the public knows what's happening in multiple city departments and knows what items are therefore should be brought to discussion here. And so I wanted to take over the bulk of that while still having the chair, recognizing the chair is going to run the meetings and help make the determination if there's a lot on the agenda or not enough, what are we doing? So I didn't want to completely remove the responsibility from the chair, but wanted to also not have them responsible for that. And then in section 1A3, the board chair shall act as a representative of the board whenever necessary. There used to be a period there. I added or appoint another board member in their place. And so that means, so previous chairs sat on the steering committee for the pedestrian facilities, Bob Wachtel was on the steering committee for the pedestrian facilities master plan, the bike facilities master plan, several public processes where the board felt like they should have official representation. And so now, again, that allows the chair to be that person while also giving them the freedom to assign the duty to someone else, or just grant it to them if someone wants to be a part of something like that.
Yeah, I don't, again, I just want this not to be misinterpreted as the chair, whether it's me or if I'm not here, Corey or anybody else saying, well, I'm going to designate, Brett or Fred or somebody, you're going to do it. Obviously, this is the kind of thing where nobody's going to be forcing another person on the board
it's
to
just
be represented.
giving you more,
Gives us more options.
Yeah, it gives us more options. I changed the dates of nominations and elections to better coincide with when when board membership actually turns over. So these were at the regular board meeting in November and December, but board membership ends in September for a lot of people, or October for others. So this just seemed to make more sense to move these elections a little bit earlier in the year and have it better coincide with when term limits are actually up for board members. And then also, this is a change. I said that each board member shall assume their position immediately following election. That will, Ryan was gracious enough to spend a whole meeting here after, just as an outgoing board member, but really he didn't need, or he shouldn't need to, or that person shouldn't need to, and instead, when the election happens, boom, that person's now the chair. And then one of the things I noticed when going through this with a comb is that regularly monthly meetings, and this is getting to what Gene was asking at the very beginning of the meeting, should we set the calendar for next year? Regular monthly meetings will be held at a time agreed upon by a majority of the board members to be reaffirmed by the board each October. So I know it's not October right now, but we are up doing the bylaws, so we can reaffirm this right now. Is the first Tuesday of the month at 3 still the best time? Keep in mind that we can change, or we're not going to approve these minutes or these bylaws changes today. This is like the first reading, and then you can offer amendments, and then we'll make those changes, and then we'll vote on them next month. But so that's food for thought. The meeting schedule is food for thought, and then other things are worth considering. And I believe those are the only changes that I made.
I think Danny and I both have comments about that. My comment is if we had them in the morning, I would miss fewer of them. So that would be my comment.
Danny?
Sounds good to me. I don't really have any comment. I personally would prefer them to be outside of the normal work hours, but I understand that doesn't work for a lot of people, but morning's good too.
I don't know if this is, again, we've only got barely half. We barely made a quorum today, so Ben, if you can put out an email and just kind of, I don't know if there's any way to just send out, or I can do one out to members saying, we're looking at if we want to keep the same schedule, or does something fit in better for you, like Brett, you just said mornings. I don't know how flexible, Fred, how flexible are you in terms of? I'm flexible. You're good with what it is, or if it went to mornings?
Yeah, I'm fairly flexible. It would just kind of depend on what was decided upon.
Yeah, me too. In terms of Ben getting a meeting space, are we kind of locked out at certain times and days? Or?
I don't. I'll look into that.
Okay.
I'll look into it and look into how we can have this discussion if we can have this discussion offline, and how to best do that.
See what
whether
our
it's
options
doodle
are.
poll or whether we need to do it in public per public meeting laws.
Can we nail down next month's meeting?
We can nail down next month. It's currently scheduled for Tuesday, February 5th at 3 p.m.
Same thing for the committee of the whole.
Committee of the whole would be Tuesday, January 29th at 6:30.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock and all the things we still have on here. I think hopefully the committee of whole.
Before we get into just, I mean, the only comments that I heard were on the time. Did any other comments about the proposed bylaws changes?
The only comment I had, and it's very much a little wordsmithing thing, under Section 2, or Article 2, Section 1, Part B, Vice Chair, and maybe you changed it already. Yes, the word his duties should be their duties.
Yeah, I changed that. I tried to de-gender everything.
Yeah, that's the only thing I caught in terms of gender
Oh,
specificity.
but that one's still there, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, did everyone see this? This was board member responsibilities. Again, should have been distributed when people joined, but the new members might not have gotten it. But it's pretty basic stuff. Letting people know if you can't make it, being knowledgeable of the bylaws and what the duties of this board are, and comply with open meeting law requirements and things like that.
Now, this is for the individual members, and then there's also under the charter, I guess you'd call it, for the board, it's under
Yep,
city charter.
And that's in the law.
2.96.
Mm-hmm.
So there it has duties of the board, and that, is the board as an entity. So there's those two things, the individual expectations and the duties of the board. If you don't have that, I'm sure that I have one that's been sent out to you. It's pretty basic.
All right, moving on.
So we've covered the, any other questions or concerns? And again, it's too bad Ben didn't have the highlighted changes. In terms of, so as I understand it, then hopefully everybody will look this over between now and next month, and then we can make any other small adjustments and vote on these. Basically, two changes that have been made, along with the changes for timing of elections and office changes, et cetera, back to earlier in the year, September, October. Okay. All right.
All right, the rest of this is going to go pretty quickly. Bike scooter share update, there is none. We have an internal meeting on the 10th, what is that, Thursday, to discuss a couple, continue wordsmithing the legal language about how we're going to allow and gently regulate mobility sharing companies. And hopefully people remember from previous discussion that there's some ambiguity in state law about, well, there's nothing that says that identifies scooters, but there is something that identifies motorized non-standard vehicles, and so we feel that scooters fall under that. Those are currently by state law not allowed anywhere, except that the state then gives cities explicit permission to allow them wherever they want. So that's kind of the model that we're looking at and how we're going to do this. There's some discussion that because the operation, or someone in the attorney's office feels that the operation of a scooter is close enough to the operation of a bicycle that we don't need to go that way, and that we can actually just kind of lump them in with bikes. And I know that that's been the sentiment of members of this board as well, that like it's close enough for the general public, and so that's the way that we should be thinking about these things. And so we're figuring out a way to kind of hybridize our approach there and make sure that we're doing things by law, and that no one who doesn't like what is happening has an avenue to attack what we've done, while also trying to be clear enough in our language and specific enough that it's understandable what we mean and to the layperson.
I guess when you said that, it made me wonder, if we treat them like bikes, do they get the rights and preferences afforded by all these plans we approve about how we're going to increase access for bikes and make, is that come into play at all? If we declare these are bikes, then they are affected by like the bicycle master plan, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that in terms of treatment like that, they are, and it's that most communities, or a lot of these companies, contribute back to the cities that they come in to improve bike infrastructure. And so there's a recognition that scooters should be operated in a bike lane, that sort of thing.
Sunday street sponsor.
Oh, there we go.
Woman, sorry.
All right, any more bike scooter comments? I'd like to move on, if that's just out of concern for time.
Is there any, in terms of laying the ground rules for them, anything in terms of governing speed? Would it be the same as e-bikes, 20 miles an hour, or?
The scooters themselves are governed by the companies at 15 at max, I've heard. Most of them are at like 14 or 12, but that the scooters are not physically capable of going over 15, supposedly. But they would be, part of that is that currently e-bikes are not allowed anywhere, really. I mean, they're allowed on the street, but they're not allowed on trails, and there's no, we call them motorized vehicles locally when state law does differentiate. And so we're trying to figure out, basically a scooter is, in my mind, similar to a class 2 e-bike, which is that it has a throttle instead of an assist, and that it goes less than 20 miles an hour. But yeah, so that will be in there. That will be part of the language, is like what they can and can't do.
Okay.
All right, the admin rules updates. So I was a little shorthand with this in the agenda because talking about admin rule 415 and the admin rule about marking crosswalks and handling requests for other traffic control devices. We talked about this at length, either at a committee of the whole meeting or last board meeting, and there's no new update. I haven't had a chance to get together with public works staff to finalize these admin rules. And now that a new public works director has been announced, and that person starts at the beginning of February, I think that we are going to wait as a staff until that person is here and on board. So it will likely be the March meeting before we bring these back to the board for a final recommendation on.
Okay. And that's under the 2019 project list. That's us, as I understand it. The draft 2019no project list, is that
I was
your office,
not
or is that from
able
us?
to send out no, that's from my office.
Okay.
So I was not able to send out this link in a way that people could use it, unfortunately, but I believe we discussed this map at last month's meeting. This is a draft map, or a map of draft projects that are scheduled for 2019, sorted by color. So yellow is MRA, I believe, and then blue is water or up. Why is this bigger than the screen?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's water. Pink is MDT, or that, like magenta is MDT. These pinks are street projects, and so these are looking different on this. But yeah, so it tells you planned year, what's happening, or what the primary street is and what's going on. Some of these things we've already heard are not happening, like this chip and seal is potentially unlikely now. 5th and 6th are unlikely to happen this year. In fact, we know they're not, but they're on this list so that in case something were to happen, in case money was to fall from the sky, it would be there. And so this is something that I will find a way to get you this list in a format that you can comment on. But this is actually, this list is explicitly called out in the ordinance as something that you guys should weigh in on. And so even though the update to Admin Rule 415 is not finalized, it's something that we still are using. The old one is something that we still use, so which says that and with that in the complete streets policy, anytime a collector or arterial is being resurfaced, we're looking to improve facilities for people biking and walking. And so for an example, Great Northern Boulevard here is a collector that is scheduled for chip seal. And so this would be something that we would look to potentially remove parking on Great Northern and add bike lanes to both sides. Remove parking from one side, add bike lanes to both sides up on Great Northern. And in fact, all of these cross streets are collectors, and really the only one that does a good job of getting you across is England, and that one is the hardest one to actually put a good facility in, which is kind of a bummer. Union Pacific has a signal, but it doesn't get you actually into the neighborhood over there, and American Way doesn't have a signal. Whitney, you live over there, am I right about that? Okay. And so even though those are collectors, the viability and importance of bike lanes on them is it just seems like a lower priority to me than England. But Whitney especially, I want to hear what you have to think about that over the coming months, because we might have the opportunity to address the situation there. California Street, this is, this is Russell. This is the, ongoing, says planned year 2018. That's because that's when construction started. But as we know, the construction is not going to be done until 2020 on there. And so, like I said, I will get you this list in a format that you guys can look. This project list stays draft until the construction season is done, because again, there's certain things that come up or that change or that might not happen. But what I would invite you to look at is and this is the way that I look at it, is first look at what is a main street and what kind of facilities does it have on it now, and can we do something better? And then following that, if it's a minor street, is it on our bike facilities master plan as a neighborhood greenway? And if so, what should we do to it? And then if it's not a street but an intersection or some other spot improvement, is there anything about that location that is particularly troublesome as someone biking or walking, and can we do something while we fix it? And I don't know of any examples like that here. Let's see, what is this? A water project in the middle of this intersection at Fairview and Eaton. Neither of those are on our Greenway network, so it's not like we should, we don't have planning tools that suggest, or planning documents that suggest that there should be something in this intersection. And it's arguable that a new fire hydrant would actually give us the money to be able to do something different there. But anyways, I'll invite you guys to look at this in a document that you can see. This is a interactive ARC map that you have to have a special city permission to be able to log into. So I'll get it as a map that you can print out, and then like a Word document or spreadsheet that you can look at about what the project is, where it is, what it's called, what agency it belongs to, and what's happening, at the very least, if not a dollar figure as well. And so it's January, and we already looked at this a little bit, the December meeting, so we're still, even though I don't have too much news for you, we're still a couple months ahead of where we've been at in the past few years at looking at this. So I'll have something to you by the February meeting, and we'll be ahead of the game.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I want to mention one thing. It was on the minutes from last meeting, and I know you didn't bring it with you, but you probably send it out as an email to give us, especially the new people, the acronym list for the stuff that's thrown out.
Okay. Yep, I'll throw that, I'll get that.
Okay, let's by the clock and by people's weary eyeballs, I think we're ready to close things up for the day. Comments and announcements from board members. We'll start with Denny. Nope. For myself, I'll wait for last. Okay, nothing. Fred. Oh, Silent Man. Brett.
I just want to remind everybody that the Winter Farmers Market is fabulous and very accessible by bike and walking at the Senior Center from, I think it's 9 a.m. to 1. There's all sorts of good veggies and stuff there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I live pretty close to there, right by the Roxy, right across from the Roxy Theater. Great popcorn, by the way. Yeah, one of the things I want to mention is for people who are here, especially, one of the things on our duties here is under our charter, says under duties of the board, implement incidental activities which support biking and walking in Missoula. And then on the next page, under scope, there's a number of things for the board. Activities to increase biking and walking. Again, Missoula in Motion's certainly a big part of that. Activities to educate Missoulians about safe and responsible biking and walking. Ben's office, Missoula in Motion, free cycles are all big parts of that. If there's something that you are thinking of, pet project or concept or idea, again, that's part of what we're supposed to be about. So feel free to be proactive in terms of things that you think would benefit, increase mode share, increase safety, reduce frustrations of pedestrians and bicyclists. Any little tidbits you want to come up with are obviously always going to be worthwhile and hopefully worthwhile investigating. And with that, unless there are any...
One more.
Sorry, Ben.
I just wanted to reiterate Bob Giordano's comment that next week the consultants will be in town for the downtown master plan, and there's going to be multiple opportunities to be involved and offer public comment and go to attend workshops. And so please visit the Downtown Partnerships website to look at all of the different ways to get involved. But it's going to be an important document that shapes what downtown looks like over the next 10 years.
Yeah, if you get the little newsletter that comes out, I guess once a week or so, it always covers this stuff in terms of where street projects are and parks and all kinds of stuff, and they have all the times and places for those. So if you're not getting that information from the city, it would be a good idea, I think, for all of us to kind of hook up with that so we can kind of keep abreast of these little things that are going on. Okay, it is exactly 5 o'clock. If there are not objections, we'll call this meeting into adjournment. Thank you very much, everybody.